Hey now, PAs, W staff, clients, and friends joining us. Welcome to Tuesday's class. Thanks for joining us. We looked at the lovely French film Amelie for your film scoring assignment, so that's due today, so get that into me by today, and we'll see the results, of course, for Friday. You know the drill. We've done this so many times before. So we're going to stay in Europe and kind of stay in maybe in France. We'll see. We'll see where Google Earth takes us. But I want to talk about another person, my Uncle Ricky, who watches these classes, and he reminded me that we should do a class on this guy together. Joe Seeby has talked about this gentleman before too. It's hard to talk about the history of jazz without mentioning him because he was such an influence on the early part of jazz, or the birth of jazz. So we're going to take a look at the really wonderful melodic genius of Django Reinhardt. It's tried to say we wouldn't have Jimi Hendrix or Eddie Van Halen or these great guitarists without one of the most famous, amazing gypsy guitarists like Django Reinhardt. He was, gypsy guitar. I said gypsy. Well, we were in Paris near the Eiffel Tower. Let's just go a little bit north, which I didn't know Belgium was up there. I knew it was somewhere over there, but up north, and this is where he's born. Belgian-born French jazz guitarist and composer. He wrote some songs too, and he was really one of the first famous jazz musicians to emerge from Europe. So jazz pretty much started in America. That I think so, because you got blues, of course, in the South, and then Scott Joplin, as we've talked about, as an early part of the ragtime and the beginning of jazz. But Europeans took a liking to jazz after we started it. I mean, I wasn't here, but you know what I mean. So that's kind of cool that Europeans were influenced by. And we also, if you remember, talked about Debussy and other composers that were influenced by Scott Joplin's early music. They liked what was going on. So if America is home to, I think it's home to stand-up comedy because of our freedom of speech, and also to jazz. That's just my personal thing. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's my class, so I'm going to go with it. Okay. So, but he's one of the most famous to come out of Europe as a jazz musician. Okay. So he was really influenced by Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, which of course we know Duke Ellington. We did him last week, and those two musicians, Louis Armstrong and Duke, are Americans. So the Europeans were influenced by us, and Django's one of the first to really become really famous. He was an interesting guy. He was odd. He would show up very late. He would sometimes not show up at all. He was just a wandering kind of gypsy sometimes. Born in 1910. So here's a little timeline of just, we talked about Duke last week. There's Scott Joplin. And he doesn't have a long life. He dies of a stroke at 43. So from the 20s, 30s, 40s, he's, well, more like the 30s and 40s. He's emerging as a real jazz talent. One of his strengths was, or one of the things that usually guitar was used for accompaniment, for strumming and comping the chords, but he was using the guitar as a solo instrument. And this is early, before amplification. He got into amplification 40s and then the early 50s, and he sounded great on that. But if you think about it, before speakers, if you have a band behind you got to play really loud. And of course, most of us know he only really had 2 fingers to play with on his left hand because of a fire. Now, I recently had a small fire in my place, but we don't have to go into that or talk about that, so there's no judgment here. But in 1928, he's 18 when this happens, and he and his wife are in a caravan, and he knocks over a candle, and this ignites a flame. He was hospitalized for 18 months, so he knocked over a candle, and it was all engulfed in flames, and the couple escaped, but he was extremely, had horrible burns all over his body. and the doctors wanted to amputate his leg. He said no to that. And they said, you will never play guitar again. I mean, by the age of 15, he was already making a living playing guitar in cafes and cafe society. So 18, I mean, that's really short to... So he had to relearn how to play guitar. And this reminds me of Fosse. Do you remember we talked about his walking style? Okay, his baldness. So he had a hat on, right? His walking style was a little bit abnormal. So because of his inadequacies, or whatever you want to call it, he made his own style. Django's going to do this the same way with okay, I only have 2 fingers to play. So the thumb, of course, you have to hold the neck, the fretboard. Here he can use this to hold down, but there's no flexibility here. Okay, so there's only flexibility here. So that's why, as we're seeing some of these clips, you're just seeing him like that. It's funny because most people can't play that fast or that well with 4 fingers, but he's doing it with half. And he met a very famous jazz violinist, Stephan Grappelli. So the two of them really created some wonderful gypsy jazz music that in Paris. And he was very lucky to escape Nazi Germany. I mean, they knew about him, but he was a celebrity in the sense that he probably got a little bit of a pass. But I mean, to be a gypsy and to also be a jazz musician, I mean, Hitler hated both of those people, along with a lot of other lists of people he hated. But, jazz was considered a really low-life profession. This was not something glamorous, I mean, at all. I mean, jazz, you might as well, was in there with prostitution and, all those other things probably. He did make it through. And then he came to America for a little bit and played at Carnegie Hall and toured with Duke Ellington, but was, I think, really late to a gig with Duke Ellington, and Duke Ellington got upset with him. Rightly so. I just think he was in his own world. There's a really great Woody Allen movie called Sweet and Lowdown, where Sean Penn does a really great job of not playing Django Reinhardt, but playing... His claim to fame is he's the best guitar player in the world, except for one gypsy who's ahead of him, and that's Django Reinhardt. And so he... is this kind of narcissistic guitar player, and that's got a sweetheart, but very high-minded and arrogant. But he does love Django, and so they do talk about Django throughout the movie. So he's referenced. It's a really great movie. So it's clever that it's not just a life story on Django. It's about somebody who was in the shadows of Django, who didn't really exist, but. It's presented as a documentary, so that's good. So his technique and style is interesting because of his handicap, because he couldn't use these fingers. He's going to sound different, and of course, like we always say, sounding different and having your own style is really good, because there's always somebody better. There's always somebody that's going to be technically better. There's somebody better probably doing classes on Django. So see, I admit that right now. But I'm trying to make it different and interesting for us. So, how can we tap into that originality? So because he doesn't have the clarity of all his hands, it's possible he does most of his things with 2 fingers. Now again, and I was talking to my dad about this the other day, because he made a really good point. I mean, and it's true. It's not about how fast you can play. Nobody, that's impressive to musicians sometimes. Maybe to common people, it's but what does that really mean? So what, you can play fast? It's like if you, sometimes that helps. It's good. Is that lasting though? No, it's the notes that he played that were really great, the way that he played, the notes that he chose, rather. And my dad said this, and I was like, yeah, that's a really, not about Django. We were just talking about music and jazz in general. And I said, that's a really good way of putting it, because it's one thing to, to play fast and be impressive, but I always go back to the question, do you want to hear this piece of music again? If you don't, that's okay, but usually as a musician, as an artist, we want people to say, yes, I want to hear that song again. And usually you don't want to say, I want to hear it because it was so fast again. You want to say, I want to hear it because it was so good. There was something really good about it. And a lot of the goodness that Django brought was the notes that he chose and how he would articulate certain things with volume, with loudness, with also just landing on kind of semi-dissonant jazz notes. So you need technique to do that. So you do need to be able to play fast, because obviously you're hearing these things that are really fast and complicated things. But then he's not just going like this the whole time. He's going like this, and then he's landing. He's very melodic in what notes he's landing on in the chord, as we can see through these things. So that's the musical genius of Django Reinhardt. I hope you enjoyed that, and thanks to Uncle Ricky for reminding me that this is a good person that we should take note of. Yeah, one of a kind, definitely. So, okay, we're going to be in Europe tomorrow, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. I want to keep you guys on your feet, but this was good. Miss you and love you, and thanks for watching. And yeah, I mean, tomorrow, you know the drill. Okay, bye.